You can get roughly 4 billion LLM tokens a month for free and use them through a single OpenAI-compatible endpoint. All this without constantly switching providers, which is pretty sweet. This is FreeLLM API, and yeah, that name is a bit obvious. It pulls free tiers from 28 providers, then routes and fails over between them automatically. It's already passed 18,000 stars on GitHub, and I'll get it running in under a minute. Then we'll find out whether 4 billion free tokens is actually useful or whether it's just the punchline. Now, here's the weird situation we're in. There's actually a lot of free LLM capacity available. Groq has a free tier, Cerebras has one, Google has one, Mistral, NVIDIA, OpenRouter free models. There's plenty out there already. So you'd think the problem is already solved. Well, as many of us know, it's not, because now you have different API keys, different dashboards, different rate limits, different model names, and slightly different APIs. And if you use coding agents, you already know what happens next. You're 10 minutes into a task, your provider hits a limit, and now you're stopping what you're doing just to swap keys, change models, or edit that config. The inference is free, though managing the free inference is the annoying part. That's what FreeLLM API does. You give it your provider keys, it tracks quota, health, and rate limits, it routes requests between providers, and if one hits a limit, it can jump over to another one all on its own. But your tools only see that one endpoint. So Cursor, Claude Code, Codex, CLI, or even your own scripts don't need to know what's happening behind it. Let's set it up. If you enjoy coding tools to speed up your workflow, be sure to subscribe. We have videos coming out all the time. Alright, honestly, the best thing I found was just to run this with Docker. So a simple git clone, then cd into it. I generated a 32-byte encryption key, which I needed, then just ran Docker compose. Once it's running, we get this local dashboard. I'll go through it in a second, but first up is the API keys. You can see here I added my API keys from all of these options. We got Google, Groq, Cerebras, Mistral, and OpenRouter. You can add as many as you want from this list here. These credentials are stored encrypted locally, and after they're added, FreeLLM API builds a model catalog from the providers you've configured. Then here in models, you can see how many monthly tokens I'm at. This is quite a lot, and all the models that this will be running to get me all those tokens. If I scroll down a little bit, I can even choose my routing strategy, which I set to balanced, and they are currently ranked by intelligence. You can run a quick test here in Playground. I'll fire this up, this prompt. Okay, it returns. Now I'm good to go. But this isn't actually the part that I care about. The useful part is what I no longer have to configure. Instead of pointing every coding tool directly at Groq, then Google, then Cerebras, I point the tool here instead. It's one API key. I'm using that free LLM API. Now, that's basically the whole integration part. And if you're using the normal OpenAI client, it's the same idea. I want to give it a longer coding task here just to see how and what it does. So I wrote out this Python script to use my API key, and you can see here in my client instance, I pass in the free LLM API key I got back. I'll just have it build out a CLI task manager in Python with all of these requirements. Okay, it's a simple project, but let's just run it, and I want to see its reasoning. It also should write out multiple files and return to me a README file too. I'm going to run it, and we're going to wait a second. There's nothing really surprising here yet. My application isn't choosing the provider anymore, the router is. So if this provider gets rate limited or becomes unhealthy, FreeLLM API can move the request somewhere else instead of my agent just dying halfway through the job. And now my script and coding agents aren't sitting behind one free small quota. They're sitting behind the pool. Then here is the final output I got back from my code, which is just a terminal output. So I made the files on my own. Now I'm going to run and test it. It all works really well, but you can see this project was simple as I only used a few tokens here, right? Less than 2,000, give or take. Now, all this sounds great, but it creates an obvious question. How does it decide where anything actually goes? Now, it's all actually pretty simple. Your provider keys stay encrypted locally, your request comes into FreeLLM API, then the router looks at the providers you have available. It knows which ones are healthy and which ones are running into rate limits or quota problems. Then it sends out the requests. Your tool still talks through a familiar API surface, including an OpenAI-compatible endpoint, so from the application's point of view, nothing complicated is actually happening. Think of it like this, okay? Our coding agents really see one door. Behind that door, FreeLLM API decides which provider should actually answer, and that explains why this project is really interesting now. It's handling all this stuff for us. Free tiers used to be something you'd have to test a model a few times. Now there's enough free inference spread across enough providers that the combined capacity is pretty useful. So the problem's changed. The problem used to be, where can I get free inference? Now it's, how do I use all this without constantly having to manage it? That's the problem FreeLLM API is built around. And for us devs, there are plenty pretty obvious places where that matters. Agent loops where extra seconds of latency isn't a big deal. If we are just playing around, okay, great. Prototyping before moving to a paired model, running multiple coding agents without constantly burning paid credits. There's a ton of reasons where this can become really useful, even if we're just learning, if we're just playing around on side projects. Basically, workloads where cost matters more than perfectly consistent latency, and that's an important factor between all of this. Because once you understand that, you also understand why this isn't just OpenRouter or LiteLLM with a different logo. So why not just use OpenRouter? Why not just use LiteLLM? Well, because the overlap is still there, but the goal is different. So if I start with OpenRouter, if you want one managed API with access to a lot of models, OpenRouter is incredibly convenient. It also has free models, but it's hosted. Your requests go through OpenRouter, and you're using the capacity available through their platform. Free LLM API works differently. You're combining your own provided accounts and your own free tier quotas. That's what gets pulled. Then there's LiteLLM. If I'm building a serious multi-provider gateway for an application, that's a very different conversation. It's broader, it's more configurable, and it's much more production oriented. But flexibility also means you're the one configuring the routing strategy and maintaining the setup. Free LLM API has a much narrower job. Take the free capacity I already have and just make it easier to use. That's all that's really happening here. So I wouldn't look at this as a replacement for every LLM gateway. I look at it as free tier maximization, but the same thing that makes this useful also creates its biggest weakness. Let's start with what it gets right. First, the pooled capacity. One tiny free tier isn't that useful. A bunch of them together, now you can actually get work done. Second, one key, one endpoint. This is probably the biggest quality of life improvement. I can configure a coding agent once and mostly stop caring which provider is answering each request. Huge win. Then local first. My provider credentials stay on my machine instead of being handed to another hosted routing service. And finally, the failover. This matters more to me than the number of tokens we're getting because free tiers are inconsistent. They have rate limits, they have daily caps, and they change. So the valuable part isn't just having several providers, it's being able to move away from one when it stops working. But here's the catch. Pulling inconsistent free services doesn't just fix everything and make them consistent. At the start of the day, maybe your preferred free model is available. Later, you've burned through that quota, and what's happened? Well, now your request may be routed somewhere you wouldn't have chosen in the first place. So, model quality can vary, latency can vary, and you're not suddenly getting unlimited access to frontier models. If your workflow absolutely depends on the best models every single time, this doesn't solve that. I would not put production infrastructure on top of this and pretend free tiers are paid infrastructure. Absolutely not. A provider can change its quota, a model can disappear, a lot can change really fast. I'll put the repo below. If you have free tier keys sitting around doing nothing, this is probably worth trying just to see how much useful capacity you can actually get out of them. If you enjoy coding tips and tricks like this, be sure to subscribe to the Better Stack channel. We'll see you in another video.